There's no movie genre more inherently franchisable than horror, given the tendency for supernatural antagonists to rise from the dead and terrorize new groups of hapless meat sacks forevermore. While other genres routinely catch flack for excessive and unnecessary sequels, horror fans love a franchise they can sink their teeth into, even if not all installments will be created equal. And so, though it absolutely makes sense that sequels to the recent likes of Alien Romulus and Smile 2 are already in the works, there are many successful horror movies from the past year or so that should really never get a sequel. So with that in mind, I'm Ellie for What Culture, here with 10 recent horror movies that should never get a sequel. Number 10, Heretic. With A24's recent horror film Heretic grossing over $50 million worldwide against a mere $10 million budget and garnering serious awards attention for Hugh Grant, would it surprise anyone if a sequel soon entered development? After all, A24 is said to be aggressively expanding its output into franchise fare, and shortly after Heretic's release, filmmakers Scott Beck and Brian Wood talked up the prospect of making spiritual sequels to it. As such, can Hollywood really resist the urge to make Heretics? Whether they dust off Hugh Grant for another go-around somehow, or shift into anthology territory, the premise could clearly be milked for at least another movie. But at the same time, isn't it refreshing when truly original horror movies are just one-and-done affairs? It's such a rarity for an acclaimed, commercially successful horror to stop at a single movie. And in the case of Heretic, that's precisely what should happen. Number 9, Maxxxine. Maxxxine marked the apparent conclusion to Ti West's X trilogy, following X and Pearl, though within days of the film's release, West noted that while Maxxxine was, quote, probably the end of the Maxxxine era, he did have one idea for a future film. West didn't elaborate further, but honestly, given that the wheels began to come off the X trilogy with its final entry, it's probably best to leave it be rather than risk tainting the entire enterprise with a dud fourth film. This isn't to say that another movie that picks up in the future when Maxxxine is a middle-aged movie star couldn't be interesting, but with Maxxxine, West seemed to lose grip of what made X and Pearl so engrossing to watch, and so why tempt fate with another? West already seems to be talking himself out of the idea, so there's a good chance this one actually doesn't happen. Number 8, Winnie-the-Pooh, Blood and Honey 2. Now, to be completely fair to the filmmakers behind Winnie-the-Pooh, Blood and Honey 2, it was an undeniable step up from the original horror parody. With a budget of $500,000, 5 times that of the micro-budget original, Blood and Honey 2 benefits from slicker production values, better makeup and effects, and effortlessly superior death scenes. It may still be a bad movie, but at least it's clear where the money went, and that the filmmakers tried to make something fun, even if these films are nonetheless fundamentally cynical exercises. 2 days after Blood and Honey 2's release, it was confirmed that a third movie is in development, but doesn't this played-out joke feel so damn tired in 2025? As those behind these films map out their twisted childhood universe, a franchise also comprised of horror parodies of Peter Pan, Bambi, and Pinocchio, it's tough not to groan at the creative bankruptcy of it all. And yet, Blood and Honey 2 easily made its budget back several times over at the box office. So, as long as these films continue to be supported, the concept is clearly going to be wrung dry of every last drop. Number 7, Longlegs. Though Oz Perkins' Longlegs concluded on a wildly ambiguous note, nothing about it feels like it was designed with a sequel in mind. For starters, the title character is dead even before the climax of the movie, and it's clear that neither Perkins nor distributor Neon expected the film to be as commercially successful as it was. Longlegs ultimately grossed $127 million worldwide, an astonishing return on its mere $10 million budget. And so, of course, Perkins was inevitably asked about a possible Longlegs successor. Though Perkins confessed the temptation to produce a follow-up to something that connected so much with audiences, he also noted that there's, quote, something glorious about leaving things alone. Given that Oz Perkins has already shot his next 2 movies, The Monkey and Keeper, both of which are set to release in 2025, it seems like he's already moved on from the world of Longlegs. As gorgeous a mood exercise as the movie is, a sequel only risks undermining its unique atmosphere. Number 6, In a Violent Nature. Art house slasher In a Violent Nature is undeniably one of the most unique and memorable horror movies of the past year. A formerly brilliant attempt to take the Friday the 13th formula and turn it into a work of pure, slow cinema. Though unsurprisingly proving divisive with general audiences due to its unconventional style, Chris Nash's film still grossed $4.6 million, which is almost 10 times its impressively low $500,000 budget. All the same, few came away from some in a violent nature anticipating a franchise, and yet a sequel was officially confirmed to be in development last summer. But it's tough to see in a violent nature working as an ongoing franchise, especially with the fresh magic of its stylistic gimmick now fully out in the open. While Nash will hopefully have a few nifty tricks up his sleeve if the film does indeed get made, it'll be all too easy for it to end up becoming the very thing it appeared to be deconstructing the first time around. Number 5. The Platform 2. After Spanish horror film The Platform was a surprise viewings hit when it released on Netflix in March 2020, it wasn't remotely surprising that the streamer commissioned a sequel, which released this past October. Except The Platform 2 wasn't merely a passable rehash of the original's brilliant concept. In its attempt to widen the now franchise lore and lay down track for further potential sequels, it ended up demystifying the first film's unnerving vagueness. Reviews from critics and general audiences alike were predominantly negative, many feeling that the unique original movie simply didn't have the bones to support an ongoing series. Still, The Platform 2 topped the streaming charts during its week of release, and while it hasn't yet been confirmed, strong metrics are all the motivation Netflix really needs to greenlight a third film. Interest has already been expressed into making The Platform 3 by the creatives, and so while it seems likely to happen within the next few years, the second film was such a tangled, convoluted mess, it's probably just best left where it is. Number 4. The First Omen. Prior to its release, expectations were through the floor for The First Omen, a prequel to Richard Donner's legendary 1976 horror film The Omen, which few were asking for. With a first-time filmmaker at the helm and an apparent lack of creative spark for a prequel, it was tough to be excited for this one. But to the credit of all involved, The First Omen ended up one of 2024's most pleasant surprises. Deeply visceral, beautifully shot, and fantastically acted by lead Nell Tiger-Free, The First Omen defied pre-release negativity and turned out to be one of the past year's best-reviewed studio horrors. With its final scene teeing up a potential sequel, it seemed like a sure thing that 20th Century Studios would hit the ground running, producing a trilogy of Omen prequel movies. Because why wouldn't they? Except the bitter irony of The First Omen being a rare horror prequel that's actually really good is that it also underperformed at the box office. Perhaps in part due to a similar nun-themed horror film Immaculate releasing just weeks prior. Despite Akasha Stevenson expressing enthusiasm for another Omen prequel, it doesn't seem likely per her first film's mediocre commercial turnout. But all in all, this works perfectly fine as a surprisingly sturdy one-off project. Number 3. Beetlejuice Beetlejuice. Tim Burton's Beetlejuice Beetlejuice defied the odds of belated comedy sequels to not only receive critical and audience acclaim, but also end up grossing over $450 million worldwide, an outcome few saw coming. Of course, the film's storming box office success immediately invited questions about a potential threequel, with numerous cast members declaring their enthusiasm. However, as fun as it would be for Burton to produce a third film called Beetlejuice Beetlejuice Beetlejuice, considering how many decades and how much effort it took to make one good Beetlejuice sequel, it might be worth Burton and co just quitting while they're ahead. Burton seems to share this sentiment, as in interviews he's heavily downplayed the prospect of a third Beetlejuice, even joking that he'd probably be over 100 years old by the time it got made. The cast and crew should celebrate that they somehow made a good Beetlejuice 2 after all this time, and then just move on. Number 2. The Substance. As much as Hollywood wants to franchise out basically any horror movie that became a commercial and cultural touchstone, body horror masterpiece The Substance should absolutely be left where it is. This awards-courting film has grossed $76.5 million to date, more than 4 times its svelte $17.5 million budget. Yet the story feels so singular and aggressively closed off that one questions where a sequel could even go. Sure, The Substance 2 could simply follow another individual using the titular compound, but it would be easy for such a follow-up to feel like a rehash and even risk undermining the sheer specialness of the original. Thankfully, Coralie Fargeat rubbished the very prospect of any follow-ups in a recent interview, bluntly declaring with a sure relish, quote, "No sequels, no prequels." And so The Substance will get to live on as a peerless piece without the whiff of IP lingering around it, and Fargeat can start work on something totally fresh. Number 1. The Nun II. The Conjuring universe is one of the most consistently successful horror franchises of all time, an effectively critic-proof enterprise where mainline entries and spin-offs alike print money every single time. A major offshoot from the frontline Conjuring movies has been the Nun duology, a pair of films centered around the titular demonic nun first introduced in The Conjuring 2. But the first Nun was a disappointingly dull snooze fest, and the Nun 2 proved to be basically more of the same. Despite that, collectively the two films have grossed more than $630 million worldwide, on a combined budget of barely $60 million, which is an astonishing return on investment any way you slice it. Though The Nun 2 was released in September 2023, a third film still hasn't been officially confirmed, even if it seems like a foregone conclusion that The Nun 3 will surely happen within the next 3 or 4 years. With the upcoming The Conjuring Last Rites marking the final entry into the mainline franchise, why wouldn't Warner Brothers wring some easy dough out of The Nun once more? And yet, considering how utterly pedestrian and forgettable both Nun movies have been to date, there's something to be said for just leaving it where it is.